The crosshairs settled on a point 962 yards downrange, where a man was about to make the worst decision of his life. Alexandra Harlow's finger rested against the trigger of her M40A5 sniper rifle, her breathing slow and controlled, her heart rate dropping to 54 beats per minute. Through the Schmidt and Bender scope, she could see every detail with crystalline clarity. The wind gusting at 18 miles per hour from the southwest, the angle of decline 11 degrees from her elevated position. The mirage dancing off the rocks at midday, distorting the sight picture just enough to matter. And the target, a 4-inch handgun held in a trembling left hand, pressed against the underside of a man's chin. Sheriff Tom Hayes's voice crackled through her radio earpiece, strained with the kind of tension that comes from watching good people make bad choices. 2 bodies already, Harlow. For God's sake, don't make it 3. Alex didn't respond, couldn't respond. The shot window was maybe 3 seconds, and talking would disrupt the breathing pattern that kept her steady. Instead, she let her mind flash back to the question that had been haunting her since she'd taken this position at dawn. How the hell did we get here? The answer, as it turned out, started 5 days ago. The nightmare always began the same way. Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, October 2019. The valley where everything went wrong. In the dream, Alexandra Harlow was 22 years old again, Marine Scout sniper attached to a joint task force hunting high-value targets in the Hindu Kush. The operation had gone smooth for the first 72 hours. Good intel, clean insertions, zero contact with hostile forces. They'd moved like ghosts through villages that had seen too much war to care about another team of Americans passing through. Then the Taliban found them. The ambush came at dawn, when the light was still gray and uncertain, when eyes played tricks and shadows became threats. Corporal Jessica Martinez had been walking point, her M4 carbine held in a low-ready position, when the first RPG screamed out of the hillside and turned their lead vehicle into a fireball that rose 30 feet into the morning air. After that, everything became noise and chaos and death. 3 teammates died in the first 60 seconds. 2 more went down with wounds so catastrophic that Alex knew they'd never see combat again, even if they survived the medevac. And Martinez, her spotter, her friend, the woman who'd shared a tent with her for 8 months and knew her better than anyone in the Corps, took a round through the femoral artery that turned her leg into a fountain of arterial blood that no amount of pressure could stop. Alex had tried to carry her. God, she tried. But Martinez was 5'9" and 170 pounds of muscle and gear, and Alex was 5'2" and barely cracked 130 soaking wet. She'd made it maybe 20 yards, dragging Martinez behind a boulder while rounds snapped past her head like angry hornets before her strength gave out and physics won the argument. So she'd done the only thing she could do. She'd left Martinez behind that boulder with a tourniquet and a prayer, climbed to high ground with her rifle, and provided covering fire for the evacuation that saved the wounded. 7 Taliban fighters that day. 7 kills at ranges between 300 and 800 yards. Perfect shots, every one. Clinical, professional. The kind of shooting that earned commendations and respect from men who didn't respect easily. Alex had done her job perfectly. She'd provided the covering fire that saved 5 other teammates, had made shots under pressure that most snipers couldn't imagine. But Martinez died anyway, bleeding out behind that boulder while the medevac finally arrived, 30 minutes too late. Alex had done everything right. She just couldn't do the impossible. Carry a 170-pound woman 5 miles while under fire and maintain sniper overwatch simultaneously. The therapist at Walter Reed Medical Center had called it survivor's guilt, said it was normal, said time would help. Time hadn't helped. Distance had. Alexandra jolted awake at 4:45 a.m., her heart hammering against her ribs, the phantom sound of Martinez's voice still echoing in her ears. "Rook, Rook, I can't feel my leg. Rook, am I gonna die?" The cabin was dark and cold. the Montana October seeping through walls that weren't quite thick enough to keep out the mountain chill. Alex lay there for a moment, controlling her breathing the way she'd been trained, letting her heart rate drop back to normal, reminding herself that she was here, not there, safe, not bleeding, alive, not dead. The guilt, though, that never went away. She rolled out of bed and began her morning ritual, the routine that had kept her sane for the 8 months since she'd bought this property and fled civilization like it was a plague she needed to escape. The cabin was small, just 1,200 square feet of rough-hewn timber and stone, built into the side of a mountain that most people couldn't find with GPS and determination. She'd bought 2,400 acres of Montana wilderness through a veterans land program, paying cash from the combat bonuses and hazard pay she'd saved over 6 years of service. The listing had described it as remote, undeveloped, former government property, ideal for privacy-seeking individuals. What it hadn't mentioned was that the nearest town was 40 minutes of dirt road away, that cell service was non-existent, and that the previous owner had been a survivalist who died alone and wasn't found for 3 months. Perfect, in other words. Alex moved through the cabin in the dark, not bothering with lights. She knew every inch of this space by touch and memory. Kitchen to the left, sparse and functional. Living area with a wood-burning stove that she'd learned to operate through trial and frozen error. Bedroom barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser. And the walls, covered with photographs. She paused in the living room, letting her eyes adjust to the pre-dawn darkness, and looked at the collection of images that told the story of a man she'd never known well enough. James Ironclad Harlow, her father, Medal of Honor recipient, Korean War veteran, who'd held a position at the Chosin Reservoir against overwhelming Chinese forces in November 1950, who'd killed 27 enemy soldiers in a single night with an M1 Garand rifle and sheer, stubborn refusal to die. The photos showed a progression. Young Marine in dress blues, 19 years old, looking like he was ready to fight the entire world. Older Marine receiving the Medal of Honor from President Truman, the ribbon settling around his neck while he stood at attention with eyes that had already seen too much. Middle-aged man in civilian clothes, teaching a 12-year-old girl how to shoot at a range outside Bozeman, his massive hands dwarfing hers as he showed her the proper sight picture. That girl had been Alex, and that lesson had changed everything. Her father had died in 2015, lung cancer from a lifetime of cigarettes and probably some chemical exposure in Korea that the VA never quite acknowledged. She'd been 16, angry at the world, angry at him for leaving, angry at herself for not saying the things she should have said before it was too late. He'd left her 3 things: the cabin, which she'd only learned about after his death, the M1 Garand he'd carried at Chosin, meticulously maintained and wrapped in oilcloth like a religious relic, and a letter, handwritten in the shaky script of a man whose hands no longer obeyed his commands. Alex had read that letter exactly once, the day after his funeral. She kept it in a drawer and hadn't looked at it since, but she remembered every word. Shooting is meditation, he'd written. It's the art of making yourself so small and so still that you become part of the landscape. The rifle is just the tool. The real weapon is patience. She joined the Marines 6 months after he died, lying about her age, forging her mother's signature on the parental consent forms, desperate to become something he would have been proud of. Scout Sniper School had nearly broken her. The instructors had treated her like a diversity checkbox, a political statement in combat boots, someone who'd wash out in the first week and prove that women didn't belong in the sniper community. She graduated second in her class, and she'd spent the next 6 years proving, over and over, that skill didn't care about your chromosomes. 47 combat missions, 38 confirmed kills at ranges most riflemen couldn't comprehend. Perfect performance reviews, commendations from officers who'd started as skeptics and ended as believers, and one catastrophic failure that ended with Martinez bleeding out while Alex did everything she'd been trained to do. Everything except overcome the laws of physics. She'd submitted her resignation papers the day after they flew Martinez's body home to Texas. Now she was here, in a cabin in Montana, surrounded by ghosts and photographs, trying to figure out what came next for a 27-year-old woman whose only real skill was putting bullets exactly where they needed to go. The run started at 5 a.m. sharp because routine was the only thing keeping the nightmares at bay. Alex stepped out into the October cold wearing running shoes, black leggings, and a Marine Corps hoodie that was 2 sizes too large and had belonged to her father. The temperature was maybe 38 degrees, cold enough to hurt when she breathed, cold enough to remind her that she was alive and functioning and still capable of feeling something other than guilt. She'd mapped out a 5-mile loop through the forest surrounding her property, following game trails and old logging roads that hadn't seen vehicle traffic in decades. The route took her through dense stands of lodgepole pine, across streams that ran crystal clear and cold enough to stop your heart, past rock formations that looked like the bones of mountains poking through the earth's skin. She ran hard, embracing the pain in her lungs and the burn in her legs, welcoming the physical discomfort that temporarily drowned out the mental noise. This was simple. Put one foot in front of the other. Control your breathing. Don't stop until the route was finished. No moral ambiguity. No life or death decisions. No watching friends die while you executed your mission perfectly, but still lost people you loved. Just running. The loop brought her back to the cabin at 6 a.m., right on schedule, her hoodie soaked with sweat despite the cold, her breath forming white clouds in the morning air. She showered in water heated by a propane system that was probably older than she was, changed into jeans and a flannel shirt, and made coffee in a French press because the cabin didn't have electricity, and she'd learned to live without the conveniences that most people considered essential. Then came the part of her morning routine that kept her sane: weapons maintenance. The basement of her cabin looked like a small armory, which it essentially was. Alex had brought her entire gun collection from her apartment in San Diego, along with enough ammunition to fight off a small army. Not because she was paranoid, because she knew, with the certainty of someone who'd lived in environments where preparation meant survival, that the worst day of your life was always the day you weren't ready for it. The M40A5 sniper rifle, her primary weapon system. 6 years of service, thousands of rounds fired, maintained with religious devotion. Schmidt and Bender scope, Harris bipod, every component checked and rechecked until it was an extension of her own body. The Remington 700 backup rifle, similar configuration, different scope. Because redundancy wasn't paranoia when your life depended on your equipment functioning perfectly. The M4A1 carbine with ACOG sight and infrared laser. Close quarters work, room clearing, the kind of fighting that happened at distances measured in feet instead of yards. The Glock 19 and Sig Sauer P229 for concealed carry, though she rarely left the property anymore. And her father's M1 Garand, the rifle that had killed 27 Chinese soldiers in a single night 74 years ago, that still smelled faintly of cosmoline and gun oil in history. She cleaned each weapon with methodical precision, her hands moving through patterns so ingrained that she could do them in complete darkness. Every rifle disassembled, every component inspected, every magazine loaded and function tested. The work was meditative, grounding, a connection to something larger than herself. Her father had taught her this, not just how to shoot, but why weapons maintenance mattered. Because your rifle was the tool that stood between you and death, and you honored it the way you honored anything that kept you alive. By 8 a.m., every weapon was clean, every magazine was loaded, every system was verified operational. And then, because old habits from combat didn't die easily, she loaded her ATV and began her daily security patrol. The property line was marked by a combination of natural boundaries and no trespassing signs that Alex had posted at quarter-mile intervals. She'd spent the first 2 months after purchase walking every inch of her 2,400 acres, learning the terrain, identifying potential approaches, understanding the tactical advantages and vulnerabilities of the land she now owned. 12 wireless trail cameras covered every likely avenue of approach, motion sensors along the northern and eastern boundaries, where the terrain was most accessible. Hidden caches with emergency supplies, weapons, and ammunition at strategic locations, because planning for disaster was cheaper than recovering from it. She'd built this place into a fortress without quite meaning to. It was just what happened when you gave a combat veteran unlimited time and a deep need to control her environment. The ATV route took her along the northern boundary first, checking camera positions, verifying that the motion sensors were still operational, looking for signs of trespassers or wildlife that might trigger false alarms. Black bears were common this time of year, fattening up before winter hibernation. Elk moved through in herds during rutting season. Even the occasional mountain lion, though she'd only seen tracks, never the actual animal. What she wasn't expecting to find was evidence of human activity. Trail camera number 7, positioned along the old logging road that marked her northwestern boundary, had been triggered at 3 a.m. that morning. Alex pulled out her tablet, loaded the wireless feed, and felt something cold settle in her chest as she watched the footage. 6 men, moving with tactical precision through her property in the dead of night. They wore civilian hiking gear, but they moved like soldiers. Proper spacing between team members, hand signals for communication, sector coverage that indicated training and discipline. They carried rifles that looked military issue, wore night vision goggles that cost more than most people's cars, and moved with the coordinated efficiency of a professional team. This wasn't some locals jacking deer out of season. This was something else entirely. Alex watched the footage 3 times, her training kicking in, analyzing details that most people would miss. The lead man was maybe 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, carrying what looked like a suppressed AK pattern rifle. The way he moved suggested special operations background, possibly Eastern European, based on the weapon choice and tactical style. They weren't hunting, they were searching for something specific. The camera tracked them for 40 minutes as they moved deeper into her property, stopping at precise locations to use handheld metal detectors, consulting GPS coordinates on a ruggedized tablet, working with the methodical patience of people who knew exactly what they were looking for and exactly where to find it. The audio was grainy, distorted by wind and distance, but Alex could make out fragments of conversation in accented English. Package 1 should be 200 meters north. Confirmed. Reading positive on detector. Bring the excavation gear. Then, at the end of the footage, just before they moved out of frame, the lead man turned back toward the camera. It was just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, but it was enough. Alex froze the image, zoomed in, enhanced the resolution as much as the cheap camera allowed, and felt the world tilt sideways. She knew that face, knew the scar that ran along the left side of his neck, disappearing into his collar, knew the cold, professional way he scanned his environment, looking for threats, calculating angles, assessing tactical situations with the ruthless efficiency of someone who'd survived more firefights than most people could imagine. Dmitry Volkov, Kandahar Province, October 2019. The ambush that killed Martinez and 2 others. Alex had been providing covering fire from an elevated position, methodically working through targets when she'd acquired a new one. Taliban fighter, maybe 400 yards out, carrying an RPG, lining up a shot on the medevac helicopter that was trying to extract the wounded. She'd taken the shot without hesitation. Center mass, perfect execution, watched through her scope as the man spun and went down. What she hadn't known until later, until the intelligence analysts pieced together after-action reports and intercepted communications, was that the man she'd wounded wasn't Taliban. He was Spetsnaz, Russian special forces, operating in Afghanistan under the kind of cover-your-ass deniability that governments loved and soldiers died for. And the man she'd wounded was his brother, Alexei Volkov, who'd bled out from a severed subclavian artery before his team could get him to proper medical care. Dmitry Volkov had sworn revenge. Alex knew this because the intelligence community had flagged his name, tracking his movements, monitoring his communications, watching as he transitioned from active-duty Russian military to private military contractor to something darker and more dangerous. And now he was here, on her property, in Montana, searching for something with military precision and resources that suggested serious backing. Alex sat on her ATV for a long moment, staring at Volkov's frozen image on her tablet screen, feeling the implications stack up like dominoes waiting to fall. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Dmitry Volkov had traveled halfway around the world to operate on property owned by the woman who'd killed his brother. The question was, why? She needed more information. Needs to understand what they were searching for, what Package 1 meant, why they were using metal detectors and GPS coordinates like they were hunting buried treasure. So she did what any good sniper would do. She started reconnaissance. Tracking Volkov's team took 3 days of careful observation, patient surveillance, and the kind of fieldcraft that separated professionals from amateurs. Alex moved through her own property like a ghost, using game trails and terrain features to stay concealed, maintaining distances that kept her outside their detection range while keeping them well within her observation capability. She didn't carry her M40A5, too bulky, too obvious. Instead, she brought a Leopold spotting scope, a digital camera with a telephoto lens, and the Glock 19 for close-range security. Day 1 was reconnaissance, learning their patterns, their routes, their procedures. They operated on a strict schedule. Insertion at 3 a.m. via what looked like a hidden vehicle staging area about 2 miles north of her property line. Movement to target locations using GPS coordinates and metal detectors. Excavation if the detectors registered positive hits. Extraction before dawn. Professional, disciplined, expensive. Day 2 was documentation. Alex photographed everything: faces, weapons, equipment, vehicles. She recorded audio of their conversations, catching fragments that filled in pieces of the puzzle. They spoke a mixture of English and Russian, switching between languages with the casual fluency of men who'd operated in multinational environments. 13 remain after this one. Ashford's timeline is aggressive. Senator wants this finished before the election cycle. Senator, that was interesting. Day 3 was the breakthrough. Volkov's team moved to the northwestern section of her property, a remote area she rarely visited because the terrain was brutal. Steep slopes, loose rock, dense vegetation that made movement difficult and dangerous. They brought excavation equipment, shovels, pry bars, a portable winch. They worked for 3 hours clearing rocks and debris from what Alex had assumed was a natural depression in the hillside. It wasn't natural. Through her spotting scope, from a concealed position 600 yards away, Alex watched as they cleared enough material to reveal concrete underneath. Old construction, weathered by decades of exposure, but still solid, still functional. A bunker. Cold War era by the look of it, probably built in the 1960s or early 70s, back when the United States was building fallout shelters and civil defense installations, like the world might end at any moment. The entrance was sealed with a steel door that had rusted to the color of dried blood. Volkov's team used bolt cutters on a chain that looked like it hadn't been touched in 50 years, pried the door open with crowbars and brute strength, and disappeared inside with flashlights. 30 minutes later, they emerged carrying a metal briefcase. Military issue, stainless steel construction, triple lock system, and based on the way they were handling it, heavy enough to require 2 men for comfortable transport. Volkov opened the briefcase carefully, like he was handling something that might bite. Even from 600 yards away, through 12-power magnification, Alex could see his expression change. Satisfaction, greed, success. She couldn't see what was inside, but she could see the interior lining. Lead. Thick enough to be obvious. The kind of shielding you use for radioactive materials. The kind the military use for nuclear weapons components. Alex's blood went cold. She'd found the property through a veterans' land program, a government initiative that sold decommissioned federal property to qualified veterans at below-market prices. The listing had mentioned it was former government land, a decommissioned military testing site, but had been vague about specifics. The record said all hazardous materials had been properly disposed of when the base closed in 1973. The records lied. She watched Volkov's team secure the briefcase, mark GPS coordinates on their tablet, and begin discussing their next move. Their radio chatter, which she'd been intercepting since day 2 using a frequency scanner, was revealing. Package 1 secured, 13 to go. 13. There were 14 of whatever they were looking for. 14 lead-lined cases hidden in bunkers across her property. Alex waited until they left, then approached the bunker carefully, watching for booby traps or security measures, moving with the paranoia that had kept her alive in Afghanistan. The door was still open. She used her flashlight to examine the interior. Concrete walls, maybe 8 feet high. Old electrical fixtures that hadn't seen power in decades. Storage racks that had mostly collapsed into rust and debris. And in the corner, 13 empty mounting brackets, lead-lined, designed to hold cases exactly like the one Volkov's team had taken. 1 down, 13 to go. She climbed out of the bunker, sealed the entrance as best she could, covering it with rocks and branches to match the surrounding terrain, making it look undisturbed. Then she hiked the 6 miles back to her cabin, her mind racing through options. Call Sheriff Hayes. Tell him what? That she'd found evidence of Cold War-era nuclear materials on her property, and armed professionals were stealing them. Tom Hayes was a decent law enforcement officer, but he was equipped for cattle theft and domestic disputes, not international nuclear trafficking. Call the FBI. Same problem. By the time federal agents responded, investigated, verified her claims, Volkov would have recovered all 14 packages and disappeared into whatever criminal network paid for such things. Call someone from her old unit. That felt like admitting she couldn't handle her own problems. And Alex had spent her entire military career proving she could handle anything thrown at her. But before she could decide on the right move, the decision was made for her. She woke at 5 a.m. on day 4, went for her run, returned at 6. Everything normal, everything routine, except it wasn't. Someone had been inside her cabin while she was running. The entry was professional. No broken locks, no damaged windows. They'd either picked her deadbolts or cloned her key, moved through her space with surgical precision, left almost no trace of their presence. Almost. Alex had spent 6 years living in environments where missing a detail meant death. She noticed things. The coffee mug on her counter moved 3 inches to the left. The throw blanket on her couch folded differently than she'd left it. Her laptop closed when she always left it open to vent heat. Someone had searched her cabin, looking for information, checking what she knew, what she'd found, what she might do. They'd been in her bedroom, her office, her basement armory, though they hadn't taken any weapons, which meant this wasn't theft. It was intelligence gathering. And there was one other thing missing. One item so specific that its absence was clearly a message. Her father's M1 Garand, the rifle he'd carried at Chosin Reservoir, the weapon that had killed 27 Chinese soldiers in a single night. The only physical connection she had left to a man she'd never known well enough. Gone. Alex stood in her basement, staring at the empty space where the rifle should have been, feeling violated in a way that combat had never made her feel. This was her home, her sanctuary, her one place of safety in a world that had become too loud and too violent and too full of ghosts she couldn't escape. And they'd reached her here. She walked upstairs, pulled out her cell phone, and made a call she'd been avoiding for 8 months. The number wasn't in her contacts. She'd memorized it, the way you memorize things that are too important to trust to technology. The phone rang 4 times. She almost hung up. Then a gravelly voice answered, rough with age and cigarettes, and too many years of breathing things that the human body wasn't designed to process. Harlow, been wondering when you'd call. Declan Forge McCready, 58 years old, Marine Raider, 2 decades of service across every major conflict from the first Gulf War to the Syrian intervention. And the man her father had trained, mentored, and molded into one of the most dangerous human beings Alex had ever met. Forge, she said quietly, I need help. Silence on the other end. Then, where are you? Montana, and I'm in over my head. Your old man pulled me out of a firefight in Somalia when I was 25 and thought I was bulletproof. Saved my life because he believed in taking care of his people. A pause. I'll be there by dawn. Send coordinates. The line went dead. Alex sat down at her kitchen table, pulled her M4A1 carbine from the basement, checked the magazine, chambered around, and set it within easy reach. Then she stared out the window at the mountains that held secrets she was now responsible for protecting. She'd spent 8 months running from her past, building a new life, trying to become someone other than the warrior she'd been trained to be. That was over now. But first, she needed to do something she'd rather face enemy fire than attempt. She needed to confront the man who'd publicly humiliated her, who'd dismissed everything she'd accomplished, who'd looked at her service record and seen only weakness. The man who, according to declassified military records she'd found that morning while searching for information about the bunkers, had been assigned to Site November from 1971 to 1973 as a security officer. Colonel Marcus Caldwell knew about those bunkers, had known for 50 years, and tomorrow morning, whether he wanted to or not, he was going to tell her everything. But Alex's mind couldn't help drifting back to 3 days ago, to the town meeting that had burned itself into her memory, to the moment when everything she'd accomplished became irrelevant in the eyes of the community she'd tried to join. The Copper Ridge Veterans Hall had been packed that evening. Standard Montana business, water rights, boundary disputes, fence lines. Alex had sat in the back row, trying to be invisible, only there because her property was mentioned in the agenda. Then Colonel Marcus Caldwell had stood to speak. At 68, Caldwell looked like he'd been carved from the same mountains that surrounded the valley. 6'2", silver hair cut high and tight, shoulders that hadn't forgotten the weight of a rucksack. His face was weathered leather, creased by decades of wind and sun. Copper Ridge treated him like royalty, their connection to something larger than cattle and hay prices. Marine Force Recon, 25 years of service. First Gulf War, Mogadishu, Iraq. 89 confirmed kills across a career that had become legend. I heard we got a former Marine Scout sniper who bought the old Patterson place, Caldwell had said, his eyes finding her in the back row. That right, Miss Harlow? Every head had turned. Alex had stood. Protocol. Yes, sir. Your father was James Harlow, Medal of Honor recipient, Chosin Reservoir. He was the kind of Marine we built the Corps around. Alex had known where this was going even before he continued. Combat has requirements, Caldwell said. Physical requirements. The ability to carry a wounded teammate 10 miles through enemy territory. Now, I'm not saying women can't serve. There are plenty of support roles where they excel. But direct combat, scout sniper operations, that requires a kind of strength and endurance that, frankly, most women just don't have. He'd paused, let that sink in. 47 combat missions, 38 confirmed kills. Impressive numbers on paper. But paper doesn't tell the whole story, does it? Can't show whether you could drag a 200-pound man in full gear to safety. Alex's jaw had clenched so tight her teeth ached, but she'd learned that arguing only made it worse. You didn't win by talking. You won by doing. I'm sure you did your best with what nature gave you, Caldwell had concluded, but let's not pretend that standards are what they used to be. He'd sat down to murmurs of agreement. Alex had remained standing for 3 heartbeats longer than necessary. Long enough to make it clear she'd heard him. Long enough to remember every word. Then she'd sat down and endured another 90 minutes before leaving. Sheriff Hayes had caught up with her in the parking lot. "Alex, wait, he didn't mean—" "He meant every word, Sheriff." Alex had unlocked her truck. "Martinez died waiting for evacuation. I couldn't carry her to. 6 years of proving myself, and when it mattered most, biology won. Maybe Caldwell's right." She'd driven away before Hayes could respond. Now, 3 days later, standing outside Caldwell's ranch at dawn, with evidence of a 50-year conspiracy and Forge McCready at her side, Alex felt that burning humiliation transform into something else entirely. Purpose. The ranch was immaculate. White fences, perfect barn, freshly painted outbuildings, horses grazing in paddocks that looked magazine-ready. Everything controlled, everything in its place, just like the man who owned it. Caldwell sat on his porch with coffee in hand, watching them approach. He didn't look surprised, didn't look concerned, just looked at Alex the way a teacher looks at a struggling student who's finally come for help. Forge walked beside her, moving with the economic grace of a man who'd spent decades carrying heavy things through hostile terrain. He was built like a linebacker, 6 feet of muscle and scar tissue, with a beard that had gone silver and eyes that never stopped scanning for threats. He'd arrived at her cabin at dawn as promised, driving a truck that looked like it had survived multiple wars, and probably had. They'd spent 2 hours going over everything: the trail cam footage, the bunker, the stolen rifle, Volkov's team, the lead-lined briefcase, and the classified document Alex had found in the county records office after 3 days of searching. Site November. Tactical Nuclear Weapons Testing Facility. Operational 1967 to 1973. Decommissioned per SALT I treaty requirements. All hazardous materials transported to Nevada test site for disposal. Signed by Captain Marcus Caldwell, Security Officer, October 15, 1973. "Colonel Caldwell," Alex said as they stopped at the bottom of his porch steps. Her voice was steady, controlled. "We need to talk about Site November." For the first time since she'd known of his existence, Marcus Caldwell's face showed something other than certainty. His eyes widened fractionally. His coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "How do you know that name?" His voice was quiet, careful. "Because I found one of the bunkers," Alex said, holding his gaze, "and the men who are cleaning it out." She climbed 2 steps, close enough now that Caldwell would have to acknowledge her as a threat or an equal. "You were assigned there 1971 to 1973. Security officer, which means you know exactly what those bunkers contain. And you've known for 50 years that the disposal records were falsified." Caldwell stood slowly, set his coffee down. His hand moved to his belt where Alex knew he kept a Colt 1911 in a leather holster. Not threatening, just aware. "You need to forget about this," he said. "Pack up your truck and drive away. This isn't your fight. They're on my land. That makes it my fight. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Then explain it to me." Alex climbed the final steps, standing on the porch level with him. 5'2" facing 6'2". "Because those men have already taken 1 package. They're coming back for 13 more. And when they get them, they're going to sell them to whoever pays the most. Maybe terrorists, maybe foreign governments, maybe criminal organizations who make dirty bombs and kill thousands of people." "That's classified information," Caldwell said. "It was classified 50 years ago. Now it's just dangerous." Forge had been standing silent at the base of the porch steps, but now he spoke. "Colonel, Declan McCready, James Harlow's protege. He talked about you sometimes. Said you were a good Marine who got handed a bad situation." Caldwell's eyes shifted to Forge, studying him. "Harlow trained you?" 1992 through 95, before he retired. "Taught me everything about reconnaissance, surveillance, and how to shoot straight when everything's going wrong." Forge crossed his arms. Also taught me about honor and doing the right thing even when it's hard. Seems like maybe you forgot some of those lessons. You don't know anything about what I've lived with. So educate us, Forge said. Inside. Before those Russian contractors come back and this gets messier than it already is. Caldwell led them into a house that looked like a military museum. Unit citations on the walls, photos of men in combat gear, shadow boxes with medals and ribbons and rank insignia. The life of a warrior preserved and displayed. He poured them coffee, black, no sugar, no cream. Then he sat at his kitchen table and told them a story that had been secret for half a century. Site November was a tactical nuclear weapons testing facility. Caldwell began, his voice tired, old. 1967 to 1973. We were developing artillery-launched nuclear warheads, small-yield devices, 2 to 5 kilotons. The idea was that conventional artillery could deploy tactical nukes on the battlefield without needing bombers or missiles. That's insane, Alex said. That was the Cold War, Caldwell replied. We built 14 functioning prototypes. Each one had a plutonium core about the size of a softball. Enough radioactive material to contaminate a city block if improperly handled. Enough to make a dirty bomb that could kill thousands. What happened to them? Forge asked. SALT I treaty happened. 1972, nuclear arms reduction. Both sides agreed to dismantle certain weapon systems. Tactical artillery nukes were on the list. We got orders to dispose of the prototypes, send them to Nevada test site for proper dismantling and burial. Alex watched his face. But you didn't. I was 27 years old, Caldwell said, staring into his coffee cup. Captain, following orders from my commanding officer, Colonel Gerald Ashford. Good Marine, combat veteran, Korea and early transition into what became Vietnam advisory roles. Smart, capable, respected by everyone. He looked up at them. Ashford told me the trucks were coming to transport the cores to Nevada, told me to coordinate security for the loading. I did my job. The trucks left Site November with all 14 cores loaded and secured. But they never went to Nevada, Alex said quietly. I didn't know that, not for sure. Not until 1995, when some documents got declassified and I started putting pieces together. Caldwell set down his coffee cup with enough force to make it ring. The trucks left Site November, but they only went 20 miles. Various locations around the facility. Ashford had them buried in unmarked bunkers, sealed with concrete, covered with rock and soil, made them disappear. Why? Forge asked. Insurance, leverage, access to nuclear materials that officially didn't exist. Caldwell leaned forward. I didn't learn the truth until 22 years after the fact. By then, Ashford was a senator, decorated war hero, 3 terms in the Senate, committee assignments, Presidential Medal of Freedom. Untouchable. And I was a lieutenant colonel with a career to protect and a family to feed. He paused. I told myself the cores were buried safely, that they'd stay buried, that no one would ever find them, that admitting what I suspected would destroy my life without actually fixing anything. You were wrong, Alex said, her voice flat. I was a coward. The word came out like a confession. I should have reported it, should have demanded an investigation, but I didn't want to believe that a man I respected had lied to me. And I didn't want to destroy my own career trying to prove it. Forge leaned against the kitchen counter. The men stealing them now, what do you know? Nothing confirmed. But if they know about Site November, if they have locations, if they have the equipment and expertise to handle nuclear materials, Caldwell trailed off. This is bigger than poachers. This is an organized operation, professional, well-funded, and they're not going to stop just because you found them. Then we stop them, Alex said. Caldwell looked at her for a long moment. You have a plan? Forge is here, former Marine Raider, EOD qualified, solid operator. Alex pulled out her phone. I know you have contacts. Former operators, people you trust. We need at least 2 more, preferably with medical experience. I know 2 men, Caldwell said slowly. Luther Kane, SEAL team medic, retired 8 years ago, runs a wilderness medicine school in Wyoming. If I call, he'll come. And the second? Nathan Weston, former Delta Force. He's complicated. How complicated? Caldwell stood, walked to his gun safe, began loading magazines. 6 years ago, Weston filed a whistleblower complaint against another Delta operator. Guy named Viktor Kozlov, originally from Russia, naturalized citizen, served in special operations. Weston claimed Kozlov was involved in black market weapons dealing, facilitating illegal arms transfers, civilian casualties that got swept under the rug. What happened? Forge asked. Both of them got discharged. The Army investigation concluded there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute Kozlov, but enough smoke to suggest both men needed to go. Weston's been tracking Kozlov ever since, chasing rumors, building a case, waiting for the moment when he could bring him down. Alex felt something cold settle in her chest. Viktor Kozlov, Russian background, special operations experience. You know him? Different Kozlov, Alex said, but she wasn't entirely sure. The Russian special operations community was smaller than people thought. Family connections ran deep. But if Weston's been tracking weapons dealers with Russian ties, he might have intelligence we need. Caldwell pulled out his phone. I'll make the calls. Kane will be here by tonight. Weston, he hesitated. Last I heard, he was in the area, following a lead on Kozlov's current operations. Tell him we might have found his target, Alex said. While Caldwell made his calls, Alex and Forge went through the site November documents, maps, operational records, security protocols from 50 years ago. Caldwell's memory was sharp. He remembered bunker locations, access routes, security measures that had been in place. He sketched additional details, corrected GPS coordinates, provided information that wasn't on any official record. By noon, they had a complete picture of Site November's layout. 14 bunkers, designated by Greek letters, Alpha through Nu, each one containing a single plutonium core in a lead-lined transport case. Forge studied the map. If Volkov's team already hit Alpha and they're moving systematically, they'll go for Beta, Gamma, Delta next. Those are the easiest access, lowest elevation, closest to their staging area. We can't defend all 14 locations, Caldwell said. Not with 4 operators. Then we don't defend them, Alex said. We let them take some, 3, maybe 4 bunkers. Let them think they're succeeding. Let them commit resources and timeline. Then we choose one bunker, fortify it properly, and make our stand there. Which one? Forge asked. Alex pointed to the map. Bunker Hotel. Highest elevation, 9,800 feet. Single approach route, exposed ridgeline, limited cover. If we set up right, we can control the entire approach for 1,000 yards. That's a last stand, Caldwell said quietly. No, Alex replied. It's a shooting gallery with me behind the trigger. Luther Iceman Kane arrived at 6 p.m., driving a Chevy Silverado with Wyoming plates. He was 56, built like he was still running Bud/S training, with gray hair buzzed to stubble and forearms like steel cables. SEAL team medic, served in the First Gulf War, Somalia, Iraq. 2 decades of patching holes in people who'd been shot, blown up, or otherwise introduced to the reality that human bodies were fragile things. He shook Alex's hand with a grip that tested her. You're the one who got Captain Caldwell's son's highest recommendation. Alex blinked. Captain Caldwell? My son, Ethan, Marcus Caldwell said quietly. Scout sniper instructor at Quantico. He called me 6 months ago, said he just graduated the best natural shooter he'd seen in 15 years. Said she had the temperament, the discipline, the instinct. Said she reminded him of me at her age. Alex felt something cold settle in her chest. He never mentioned you were his father. He wouldn't. Ethan believed in earning respect based on performance, not bloodlines. Caldwell's voice was tight. He told me her name was Alexandra Harlow. Said she was headed to Montana after she separated. Asked if I'd look out for her, maybe offer guidance. And at the town meeting, you saw me and... Alex's voice trailed off. I saw you and I saw Ethan, Caldwell said. His eyes held weight that hadn't been there before. And I couldn't reconcile it. The room went quiet. Finally, Forge spoke. What aren't you telling us, Colonel? Caldwell took a long breath. Ethan died 3 weeks after your Syria operation, 2018. Counter-sniper position, covering an egress route for a team that got compromised. Alex felt the world tilt. I didn't know. He was covering your team, Caldwell said. Your unit. The intelligence briefing said you'd acquired high-value intelligence, but the egress was hot. Ethan volunteered for Overwatch. He held that position for 6 hours against overwhelming fire. Got your people out safely. He looked at Alex with eyes that had carried this weight for 6 years. He died protecting the sniper he'd trained. Died making sure you lived. At that town meeting, I saw you alive and him dead. Couldn't accept that my son made the choice he was trained to make. So I lashed out. Alex stared at him, processing. Captain Caldwell saved my life in Syria. I was pinned down, 3 hostiles closing in. He provided counter-sniper fire from 800 yards, dropped all 3 in 15 seconds. Caldwell's eyes glistened. That's Ethan, always teaching, always pushing people to their potential. After the mission, he pulled me aside, Alex continued, said, Harlow, you've got the talent. Now develop the discipline to match it. Be exceptional. I asked him who taught him that. He just smiled and said his father was a Marine legend. Caldwell pulled out a framed photograph from a cabinet. Ethan Caldwell in dress blues, captain's bars on his collar, a slight smile that suggested he knew something the camera didn't. I was wrong about you, Caldwell said quietly. Ethan trained you, taught you everything I taught him, which means you're generationally good. And if I'd been half the man he was, I would have seen that from the beginning. We honor him by finishing this, Alex said, by stopping Volkov and Ashford, by making sure those cores don't end up killing the people Ethan died protecting. Nathan Cypher Weston arrived at 8 p.m., driving a nondescript sedan. He was 47, weathered, carrying the weight of hard decisions and unsupported accusations. He looked exactly like someone who'd spent 6 years tracking a ghost through the international arms trade. He carried a tactical laptop and 3 phones. You're the ones who found Volkov, he said without preamble. Confirmation, not a question. We found someone working his bunkers, Alex said. Team of 6, former Spetsnaz by the tactical movement, led by a man named Dmitry Volkov. That's Victor's brother, Weston said, opening his laptop. Dmitry Volkov, 51, former GRU Spetsnaz, dishonorably discharged from Russian military in 2015 for unauthorized operations in Ukraine. Since then, private military contractor, specializing in high-value material recovery. Translation, he steals things governments don't want stolen. He pulled up files. I've been monitoring Viktor Volkov's network for 6 years. 3 months ago, I intercepted communications between Viktor and someone in the U.S. government. Codenames, encrypted channels, but the content was clear. Viktor was brokering a deal for legacy nuclear materials, Cold War-era cores, suitable for dirty bombs, worth millions on the black market. Senator Gerald Ashford, Caldwell said quietly. Weston's eyes sharpened. You know him? He was my commanding officer at Site November, the man who ordered those cores buried 50 years ago. Weston typed rapidly. Ashford's in financial trouble, campaign debts, legal issues, needs money fast. Viktor approached him with a deal. Ashford provides locations and access intel. Viktor handles recovery and sale through his brother Dimitri's network. They split the profit. He turned the laptop around. Based on black market pricing for weapons-grade plutonium, we're looking at somewhere between $50 and $200 million. Depending on buyers, depending on how desperate certain parties are for material that can't be traced. Terrorist organizations, Forge said, or state actors who want plausible deniability, Weston replied. Iran, North Korea, non-state groups with serious backing. The cores from Site November are perfect, old enough that the paper trail is buried, small enough to transport easily, potent enough to make credible threats. Alex studied the data. You've been tracking Victor for 6 years. Why not come forward earlier? Because I needed proof, evidence that would stick. Weston's face was grim. Victor's too smart to leave obvious trails. I had to wait until he committed, until he made a move that exposed everyone involved. He pulled up another file. I've been feeding you intelligence for 3 days. Encrypted messages about Dimitri's operation timeline, team size, target locations. You're the one who warned us, Alex said. Bunkers, Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, and Hotel. Tomorrow night, starting at 2100 hours, Dimitri's bringing reinforcements from Victor's network. 14 operators plus 4 security personnel provided by Ashford. 18 hostiles total. 4 against 18, Kane said. Bad odds. So we don't fight on their terms, Alex said. We choose the battlefield. They spread the maps across Caldwell's dining room table. Topographical charts, satellite imagery, GPS coordinates. Everything they knew about Site November. Everything Weston had intercepted about Volkov's operation. 14 bunkers, Caldwell began. Dimitri has recovered at least 4 cores, possibly more. We've confirmed Bunker Alpha was hit 6 days ago. Intelligence suggests they've taken Beta, Gamma, and Delta as well. Forge studied the terrain. That's fast work. They know exactly what they're looking for. Ashford gave them everything, Weston said. Locations, access codes, handling procedures. This isn't random, it's surgical. Alex pulled up Dmitry Volkov's photo. This is personal for him. I killed his brother in Kandahar, 2019. He's not just here for money, he wants revenge. Which makes him dangerous, Caldwell said. Emotional operators make mistakes, but they also take risks that rational people wouldn't. Kane inventoried his medical supplies. If this goes kinetic, we need casualty evacuation routes. Can't count on medevac in time. We plan for self-sufficient operations, Forge said. Assume we're on our own until it's over. Alex and Caldwell worked on sniper positions, calculating fields of fire, overlapping coverage, primary and alternate locations. Bunker Hotel, Alex said, pointing to the map. 9,800 feet elevation. Single approach from the east. Exposed ridgeline before they reach the bunker. If we set up here, she indicated a rock formation 600 yards west. Primary hide with clear line of sight down the entire approach. Wind? Caldwell asked. Prevailing from the southwest, average 15 to 20 miles per hour. Gusty at that elevation, but predictable. You've made shots past 1,000 yards in combat? 1247 yards, Alex said. Helmand Province, 2020. High wind, moving target, elevated position. HVT extraction mission. 1 shot. Caldwell looked up from the map. 1247. That's the same distance as my record shot. First Gulf War, 1991. Iraqi officer coordinating artillery. The shots taught at scout sniper schools now. Something shifted in his expression. Who was your spotter? Captain Ethan Caldwell. The room went quiet. He never told me, Marcus Caldwell said finally. Never mentioned that he'd coached a shot matching my record. He said records didn't matter, only bringing everyone home. Caldwell nodded slowly. That sounds like Ethan. He turned back to the map. All right, your primary sniper. I'll spot. Let's prove that modern warriors can make the old guard proud. They worked through the night, building the operational plan. 2-person teams, Alex and Caldwell would handle long-range overwatch and precision fire. Forge and Kane would execute core recovery with proper radiation protocols and medical support. The timeline was tight. Start at 0400, arrive at Bunker Hotel by 0600, 2 hours to fortify positions and recover the core. By 0800, they'd notify federal authorities with a complete evidence package. By the time Dimitri's team arrived for their evening operation, they'd be facing not just 4 operators, but FBI, DOE, and whatever other federal agencies descended on nuclear material theft. "What about resistance?" Forge asked. "Dimitri won't just let us waltz in." "We go in hard and fast," Alex said. "Dawn operations. Hit the bunker before he expects us. Recover the core, secure it, establish defensive positions before he realizes what's happening." "And when he does realize," Kane asked, "then we're ready for a fight." They broke at midnight for food. MREs from Kane's truck, the kind of meal that transported them all back to deployment days. Forge pulled Alex aside during the break. "You trust Caldwell? After everything?" "I trust his guilt," Alex said. "I trust his need to fix this. And I trust that he trained the man who trained me. That's a lineage I can believe in." "And his son?" "Ethan Caldwell saved my life in Syria, died 3 weeks later covering my unit's egress." Alex was quiet. "I didn't know until tonight. Didn't know he was Marcus's son. Didn't know he died because he trained me too well." "He died doing his job," Forge said. "Your father would have done the same thing." At 0200, they laid everything out. M4A1 carbines with suppressors, ACOG sights. Alex's M40A5 with the Schmidt and Bender scope that had been with her through 6 years and 38 kills. Caldwell's own M40, meticulously maintained despite 21 years of retirement. Ammunition counted, magazines loaded, every round accounted for. Radiation detection equipment from Kane's Wilderness Medicine School. Lead line transport cases for the recovered core. Communications gear, encrypted radios, satellite phones. 300 rounds of .308 Winchester, Alex reported. 800 rounds 5.56 NATO, sufficient for sustained engagement. Medical supplies for 4 casualties, multiple trauma scenarios, Kane added. "Can't replace a hospital, but I can keep people alive long enough to reach one." Forge checked his EOD gear. "Radiation protocols are straightforward. Don't touch the core directly. Don't breach the case. Monitor exposure constantly. We should be able to extract safely." Weston set up his computer station. "I'll coordinate federal response once you secure the core. FBI, DOE, ATF. But response time from Billings is 90 minutes minimum. You're on your own until then." At 0330, Alex received an encrypted message. Unknown sender, but she recognized the signature. "Volkov confirmed for tonight, 2100 hours, Bunkers Echo, Foxtrot, Golf, Hotel. Full team deployment. Count 16 operators, 4 Ashford security. Heavy weapons possible. Suggest extreme caution." She read it aloud. 16 plus 4, Caldwell said. 20 hostiles confirmed. "They're not taking chances this time," Forge added. "Neither are we," Alex said. She looked at each of them. Forge, who'd come because her father had trained him. Kane, who'd answered Caldwell's call. Weston, who'd spent 6 years chasing this moment. Caldwell, who was trying to atone for 5 decades of silence. "We do this right, we go home alive," she said. "We do this wrong, those cores end up on the black market and people die. Possibly thousands. That's the stakes." She pulled out her father's photograph from Chosin Reservoir. "My father held a position against impossible odds because that's what Marines do. We hold the line when no one else can. We complete the mission even when the mission is impossible." She set the photo down. "Tomorrow, we hold hotel, and we remind 20 criminals that skill matters more than numbers." At 0400, they loaded into 2 vehicles. Alex and Caldwell in her F-150 with the sniper rifles. Forge and Kane in Kane's Silverado with the EOD gear and medical supplies. They drove through darkness toward the mountain that held secrets buried for 50 years. The sky was just beginning to lighten when they reached the base of the ridgeline leading to Bunker Hotel. They parked the vehicles in concealed positions, covered them with camouflage netting, and began the 4-mile hike to the summit. Alex led the way. Her mountain, her mission, her responsibility. Behind her, 3 warriors followed, each carrying the weight of their own histories. Forge carried 60 pounds of gear like it weighed nothing. Kane moved like water, fluid and silent. Caldwell climbed with the steady pace of a man who'd done this before, who'd led Marines in combat and knew that speed mattered less than sustainability. They reached Bunker Hotel at 600, just as the sun broke over the eastern peaks, spilling golden light across exposed granite and sparse vegetation. The bunker entrance was exactly where Caldwell's 50-year-old memory had placed it. Concrete door, rusted lock, the seal of secrets too long buried. Forge examined the entrance. Clean, no signs of tampering. Dmitri hasn't been here yet. Then we're ahead of schedule, Alex said. Let's make it count. They worked with practiced efficiency. Forge and Kane breached the bunker, swept for threats, established safe entry protocols. Alex and Caldwell set up primary and alternate sniper positions with overlapping fields of fire, covering the approach from 600 yards out. Inside the bunker, Forge found what they'd come for. A lead-lined case, military designation stenciled on the side. Project Winter Forge, Core Hotel, serial WF-08. Got it, he radioed. Radiation levels nominal, case intact, proceeding with extraction. Kane monitored with a Geiger counter, while Forge carefully secured the case in their transport container. 20 minutes of careful work, every movement deliberate, every protocol followed exactly. At 700, the core was secured. Forge and Kane positioned themselves at the bunker entrance, establishing close defense perimeter. Alex and Caldwell were in their primary hide, 600 yards west, with clear line of sight down the entire approach corridor. The wind at this elevation was exactly what Alex had predicted. 15 to 20 miles per hour from the southwest, gusting occasionally to 25. She set up her M40A5 with the patience of someone who knew that rushing meant missing later. Caldwell lay beside her with his spotting scope. Winds consistent, 3 o'clock, 17 miles per hour sustained. Copy, Alex replied. Bunker entrance is at 600 yards. Approach corridor extends to 1400. Effective range for M40 is out to 1200 in these conditions. Beyond that, we're pushing the envelope. Ethan trained me to 1500, Alex said. I can reach anything that comes at us. Caldwell was quiet for a moment. He really did see something in you. He saw what you taught him to see. Patience, discipline, the absolute certainty that when you pull the trigger, the shot connects. At 800, Weston made contact with federal authorities. FBI field office in Billings, DOE, emergency response, ATF. He provided evidence packages, coordinates, threat assessments. Response time is 90 minutes, Weston reported. They're scrambling assets, but we're on our own until at least 0930. Then we hold until 0930, Alex said. Standard defensive operation. Establish kill zones, maintain fire discipline, make every shot count. The mountains settled into quiet, birds calling, wind rushing through sparse trees. The vast silence of wilderness that had seen too much violence and would see more today. Alex lay behind her rifle, controlling her breathing, letting her heart rate drop to operational levels, becoming part of the landscape the way her father had taught her, 54 years after he'd done the same thing at Chosin Reservoir. Somewhere below, moving up the mountain with professional precision and criminal intent, Dmitri Volkov led 20 operators toward a confrontation he didn't know was waiting. A confrontation that would prove skill mattered more than numbers, precision more than fury, and that 4 defenders who knew their ground could hold it against 20 attackers who thought victory was inevitable. The sun climbed higher, the wind held steady, and Alexandra Harlow settled behind her rifle and waited for the moment when patience became violence. The wind at 9,800 feet was a living thing with moods and intentions. It gusted and swirled, pulled at clothing, whispered lies about trajectory and holdover. Alexandra Harlow had been tracking it for 2 hours now, learning its rhythm, understanding its patterns, becoming intimate with the invisible force that would make or break every shot she took today. Wind at altitude wasn't linear. It curved around ridgelines, accelerated through gaps, died in pockets of dead air where the terrain created shelter. Reading it required patience and instinct in equal measure, knowledge that couldn't be taught in classrooms, but only earned through thousands of hours behind a rifle scope. Caldwell lay beside her in the primary hide they'd built into the natural terrain, his spotting scope steady on a compact tripod. They'd used rocks and sparse vegetation for concealment, creating a position that from 400 yards looked like nothing more than shadow and stone. From 800 yards, they were invisible. From 1,200, they were ghosts. Movement, Caldwell said quietly. Southeast approach, multiple contacts. Alex shifted her scope smoothly, no sudden movements. She found them immediately through the Schmidt and Vendor optics. 1,400 yards out, heat shimmer making them dance in the magnified view, but unmistakable in their tactical precision. 20 operators moving upslope with the careful discipline of professionals who knew they were exposed. They wore mixed civilian and tactical gear, anonymous clothing that hid body armor and weapons. They moved in 4 teams of 5, proper spacing between elements, sector coverage that indicated serious training. These weren't amateurs. These were former special operations soldiers who transitioned to private military contracting, who took high-dollar jobs in gray legal areas because their skills didn't translate well to civilian life, and the money was too good to refuse. Count 20, Alex confirmed. 4 teams, staggered formation, lead element at 1,400 yards, trail element at 1,600. Wind holding at 3 o'clock, 18 miles per hour sustained, gusting to 23, Caldwell reported. Temperature 62 degrees, barometric pressure stable. Visibility excellent. Alex did the calculations automatically. At this distance, with this wind, she needed 3.7 mils of windage adjustment. The angle of decline added complexity, requiring she aim slightly lower than straight-line distance would suggest. And the altitude affected bullet performance. Thinner air meaning less drag, but also less predictable trajectory. Every variable mattered. Every calculation had to be perfect. I have multiple shots available, she said, waiting for your call. Hold, Caldwell replied. Let them commit. Once they're past 1,200 yards, they can't retreat to cover fast enough. That's when we want contact. The lead team continued their advance. They were good, Alex had to admit, using terrain features for concealment, moving during wind gusts that would mask sound, maintaining intervals that prevented a single shooter from engaging multiple targets simultaneously. But good wasn't enough when you were being tracked by someone better. At 1,300 yards, the lead element stopped. Hand signals passed between team members. 2 men moved forward in bounding overwatch while others provided security. Textbook, small unit tactics. Alex tracked the point man through her scope. Male, maybe 6 feet tall, carrying what looked like a suppressed AK-74M with modern optics. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd been in firefights before and knew how to survive them. His head was on a swivel, scanning constantly, looking for threats he couldn't see. At 1,200 yards, he stopped again, raised his hand in a fist. The entire formation halted. Something was wrong. They'd sensed something, maybe heard something, possibly just that sixth sense that combat veterans developed. They're spooked, Caldwell whispered, probably expected the approach to be uncontested. Should we engage now? Alex asked. Negative. They haven't committed yet. If we fire and they retreat, we lose the advantage. Be patient. The point man conferred with his team leader via radio. Through her scope, Alex could see the conversation, could read body language even if she couldn't hear words. The team leader was pointing toward Bunker Hotel, 600 yards ahead of their current position, issuing orders, making decisions. Then a new figure emerged from the trail element. Even at 1,200 yards, even through heat shimmer and wind distortion, Alex recognized the gait, the way he carried himself, the scar on his neck. Dmitry Volkov. He moved forward through his formation, joining the lead element, taking personal command. He pulled out a tablet, checked something on the screen, then pointed directly toward Bunker Hotel. "That's our target," Caldwell said. "He knows exactly where he's going. Ashford gave him everything." Volkov issued commands. The formation tightened slightly, preparing for the final push. They were going to move as a concentrated force, overwhelming speed and numbers, betting that the bunker was undefended. They were about to learn how wrong that bet was. At 1,100 yards, the entire formation began moving. No more careful bounds, no more tactical patience. They advanced like they owned the mountain, 20 operators against an empty bunker and an extraction that should take 15 minutes. "Range 1,100, Caldwell called. Wind shifting, now 330, 20 miles per hour. Lead element entering kill zone. Alex's breathing slowed. Her heart rate dropped from 60 beats per minute to 54. The rifle settled into the pocket of her shoulder like it was part of her skeletal structure. The crosshairs found center mass on the lead-designated marksman, a man carrying an SR-25 with a high-powered scope. He was Volkov's counter-sniper insurance, the man who was supposed to identify and neutralize threats like Alex. The first target that had to fall. She waited for the wind to lull, watching grass at 600 yards. When it stopped bending, she had a 3-second window. The rifle settled. The crosshairs found center mass. Alex's finger took up the trigger slack, that last millimeter of resistance before the sear broke and physics took over. The shot broke clean and smooth. The .308 Winchester round covered 1,100 yards in 1.2 seconds, traveling at just over 2,000 feet per second, dropping 3 feet from boreline due to gravity, pushed 18 inches to the right by wind, before Alex's holdover compensation brought it back on target. The designated marksman dropped like someone had cut his strings. His SR-25 clattered on rocks. His team scattered, seeking cover that didn't exist on the exposed ridgeline. "Hit," Caldwell confirmed. "Good shot. Reload." Alex cycled the bolt, ejecting the spent casing and chambering a fresh round in less than 2 seconds. She found her second target before the first team had finished reacting. Another designated marksman, 900 yards now, moving into cover behind a boulder. The boulder provided concealment from frontal fire, blocking line of sight from Bunker Hotel's position. But from Alex's elevated angle, 600 yards to the west, she could see his leg extending beyond the rock face. She adjusted her aim point, sent the round. The man screamed, grabbed his shattered femur, rolled out of cover in shock and pain. Not a kill shot, but a fighter removed from the battlefield just as effectively. Maybe more so, because now his teammates had to deal with his screaming. "2 down, Caldwell said. "They're pinned, looking for the shooter." "Let them look," Alex replied, already finding her third target. "At this range, with this position, they'll never find me before I find them." The assault force went to ground. Radios crackled. Orders were shouted in Russian and English. They were professionals, dealing with an unexpected complication. But Alex could see the problem they faced. No cover, no concealment, caught on an exposed ridgeline against a sniper who just made 2 difficult shots look easy. Volkov's voice carried across the distance, authoritative and angry. "Suppressive fire! Mark the position!" 8 rifles opened up simultaneously, a wall of lead snapping past Alex's hide, impacting rocks 50 yards to her left. They were guessing, shooting at shadows, wasting ammunition on empty terrain. Alex remained perfectly still, didn't flinch, didn't react. The rounds weren't even close. She let them burn through magazines while she waited for targets. A fire team leader stood to direct his men, trying to coordinate movement. Fatal mistake. Alex tracked him smoothly. 800 yards. Light wind, steady conditions. Perfect shooting weather. The shot caught him in the upper chest, high and center, the impact spinning him like a top before he fell. The suppressive fire faltered as his team realized their leader was down. 3 down, Caldwell said. They're breaking, attempting to flank left. I see them, Alex confirmed. 4 operators were attempting to use a shallow depression as cover for a flanking maneuver. It might have worked against a less experienced shooter. The depression provided decent concealment, and in 200 yards they'd reach a cluster of boulders that would give them actual protection. But Alex could see the depression's limitations. She could see that in exactly 180 yards, they'd have to cross a 20-yard gap with zero cover, a natural choke point where the terrain funneled them into a kill zone. She let them commit, watched them move with desperate hope that they'd found a solution. Waited until they reached the point of no return. The first man across the open area made it 3 steps. The second made it 2. The third went to ground immediately, smart enough to recognize the trap, but there was nowhere to go. The depression behind him was a dead end. The boulders ahead were too far. He was caught in between, pinned by perfect positioning and ruthless calculation. Alex took her time, made the shots count. Controlled breathing, steady trigger press, follow-through on every round. By the time the flanking attempt collapsed, 6 of Volkov's 20 operators were combat ineffective, dead or wounded badly enough that they were out of the fight. The assault had stalled completely. The survivors huddled behind inadequate cover, pinned by a sniper they couldn't locate and couldn't suppress. It was every infantryman's nightmare. Death from distance, invisible, inevitable. And somewhere below, Dmitry Volkov was learning that bringing 20 men to kill 1 woman had been 14 men too few. His voice cut through the mountain air like a whip crack. Command presence even in defeat. We didn't come this far to quit. Targets 300 yards ahead. We take it or we die trying. Alex tracked him through her scope. The scar on his neck was visible even at 700 yards. Legacy of the rounds she'd put into his brother 5 years ago in Kandahar. His jaw was set in determination, eyes scanning for threats he couldn't see. He's rallying them, Caldwell said, moving with remaining operators, coordinated rush toward the bunker. Alex watched the assault develop. 14 operators minus 6 casualties, left 8 effectives plus Volkov, 9 total. They were moving with desperate courage across open ground, knowing they were exposed, knowing the sniper was watching, but pushing forward anyway because Volkov had given them no choice. It was madness or bravery. Sometimes the line between them disappeared entirely. 700 yards, 600, 500. Alex's crosshairs tracked Volkov's center mass. She could end this now, drop the leader and watch his assault collapse. Her finger rested against the trigger, taking up slack. But something held her back. Some instinct honed through 47 missions. This needed to play out differently. At 400 yards, Forge and Kane's M4A1 carbines cracked in rapid succession from the bunker entrance. Controlled pairs, professional fire discipline. 2 more of Volkov's operators went down, legs swept out from under them by rounds that shattered bone and tore muscle. The assault broke. The survivors scattered like water hitting hot oil, seeking any cover they could find. Volkov dove behind a cluster of rocks, trapped 400 yards from his objective, pinned by crossfire from 2 positions he hadn't known existed. He's done, Caldwell said. The assault's finished. Time to end this. But before Alex could respond, another voice joined the battle. Amplified through a megaphone, authoritative and arrogant. Volkov, stand down. This operation is over. Senator Gerald Ashford emerged from the southern approach like a ghost materializing from memory. 73 years old, but moving with military bearing that 50 years of soft living hadn't entirely eroded. He wore a tactical vest over an expensive suit, carried a Sig Sauer P226 in his right hand, and looked absolutely furious. 4 men in dark suits followed him, spreading into a security formation. Former Secret Service, probably, or FBI agents moonlighting for a senator who paid better than government work. "Senator," Volkov called back, "we can still do this. We just need to—" "We need nothing." Ashford's voice cracked like thunder. "You failed. 8 men down. The core is compromised. Federal authorities are probably already en route." Through her scope, Alex watched the scene develop 600 yards downrange. Ashford advancing with his security detail, Volkov pinned behind rocks, the surviving operators caught between a failed assault and an angry employer. "Then we extract now," Volkov said. "Take what we can, regroup and—" "I'm not extracting," Ashford interrupted. He raised his pistol, not toward the bunker, not toward Alex's position, toward Volkov. Alex's breath caught. Through 12-power magnification, she watched a 50-year conspiracy collapse in real time. "You were supposed to be professional," Ashford shouted. "Surgical, clean. Instead, you've drawn attention, created casualties, failed to secure even half the cores. Senator, you need to calm." The Sig Sauer barked once, twice, 3 times. Volkov jerked with each impact, his body armor absorbing 2 rounds, but the third caught him in the shoulder, just above the vest's collar line. He fell backward, hand clutching the wound, blood pulsing between his fingers in arterial rhythm. Not immediately fatal, but serious. Volkov would bleed out in minutes without medical intervention. The surviving operators stared in shock. Their employer, their mission commander, the man who'd recruited them from elite units and promised enough money to retire, had just shot their team leader. Whatever loyalty they'd felt evaporated instantly. They dropped their weapons, raised their hands, the universal gesture of men who just realized they were on the wrong side of a situation spiraling beyond control. Ashford turned toward the bunker, toward the objective that had driven him to betray everything he'd once stood for. He reached into his tactical vest, pulled out a small black device that made Alex's blood run cold. A detonator, commercial blasting equipment, LED display showing "armed" in green letters, a timer counting down from 2 minutes. "I had insurance," Ashford's voice carried across the ridgeline with the calm certainty of a man who'd already accepted his fate. Shape charges placed throughout the bunker complex. Dead man's switch. If I don't enter the disarm code every 60 seconds, or if someone kills me, this entire mountain becomes a radioactive wasteland. The LED display blinked. 159, 158, 157. The surviving operators began backing away rapidly. Nobody wanted to be near ground zero when plutonium got dispersed by high explosives. They'd signed up for money, not martyrdom. Alex's crosshairs settled on Ashford. She could take the shot right now, drop him before he triggered the charges manually. But a dead man's switch meant the moment his heart stopped, the timer would hit 0, and the mountain would bloom with radiation that would poison this valley for generations. "Ashford, don't do this!" Caldwell's voice boomed across the mountain. He'd stood from their hide, abandoning concealment, making himself visible, making himself a target to save everyone else. Ashford's head turned, recognition flickering across his face. "Marcus? Is that you?" The timer read 138, 137, 136. "It's me," Caldwell said, walking forward slowly, hands visible, rifle slung across his back. "And I'm asking you as a brother Marine, as someone who respected you once, there's still a way out of this." "Respected?" Ashford laughed, bitter and broken. "You followed my orders without question, Marcus. Never suspected, never questioned, just like a good little captain. 129, 128, 127. Caldwell kept walking, kept closing distance. 60 yards now, 50. Close enough that Alex could see both men clearly through her scope. "I should have questioned," Caldwell said. "Should have reported what I saw. Should have chosen honor over career. I failed, but you can still make the right choice." "There's no right choice left," Ashford said. His left hand moved, raising the Sig Sauer, not toward Caldwell, not toward the bunker, toward himself, barrel under his chin. "Only endings, and I choose mine. 1 minute, 8 seconds, 107, 106. Whatever you've done, however deep you've fallen, this doesn't end it," Caldwell said. "This just makes it worse, kills innocent people, poisons this land for generations." "I won't spend my final years in federal prison," Ashford replied. "Won't let my legacy be treason and corruption. Better to end it here, on a mountain, like a warrior should." His left thumb moved toward the pistol's trigger. His right thumb hovered over the detonator's red button. The LED read 058, 057, 056. Through her scope, Alex could see every detail with terrible clarity. Ashford's finger tightening on the trigger. The detonator's LED counting down. Volkov bleeding out 30 yards away, forgotten. Caldwell standing exposed, 40 yards from a man who was about to make the worst decision possible. She had maybe 3 seconds to make a choice. Option 1, shoot Ashford. Kill him before he can trigger either weapon. But dead man's switch meant his death would activate the explosives anyway. Result, mountain becomes radioactive wasteland. Option 2, shoot the detonator. Try to destroy the device before it could send the trigger signal. Difficult shot, moving target, high risk of hitting Ashford's hand and causing him to death grip both triggers. Result, probably radioactive wasteland. Option 3, shoot the pistol. Remove his suicide option, forced negotiation, buy time. Hardest shot, smallest target, highest precision required. But the only option that didn't guarantee catastrophe. The wind lulled. 3-second window opening. Alex's training took over. Every lesson from Captain Ethan Caldwell flooding back. Be disciplined, be patient, be perfect. 042, 041, 040. She made her choice. The shot came from 600 yards out. Alex hadn't waited for permission, hadn't asked for authorization. She'd simply read the moment the way a sniper reads wind, calculated the variables the way she'd calculated 1,000 shots before, and made the call that only she could make. The .308 Winchester round traveled at 2,600 feet per second, covering 600 yards in approximately 0.7 of a second. In that time, it dropped 2.3 feet due to gravity, was pushed 14 inches to the right by wind before Alex's holdover brought it back, and maintained enough energy to do exactly what was needed. The bullet struck the Sig Sauer P226 in Ashford's left hand with enough force to obliterate the weapon. Metal fragments exploded outward, tearing through his palm, shredding skin and muscle and small bones. The pistol spun away, harmless, landing 30 feet away in sparse grass. Ashford screamed, dropped to his knees, his mangled left hand spraying blood across the rocks, fingers bent at angles that bones weren't meant to achieve. But his right hand still held the detonator, and the LED still counted down. 033, 032, 031. "Forge!" Caldwell shouted. "The detonator, now!" Forge exploded from the bunker entrance like he'd been shot from a cannon. 58 years old and moving like he was 22, covering ground in great bounding strides, every muscle focused on closing the 200 yards between him and Ashford before the timer hit 0. 028, 027. Ashford saw him coming, tried to raise the detonator higher, tried to protect it or maybe trigger it early. His thumb moved toward the red button. No! Caldwell was running now too, coming from a different angle, trying to reach Ashford before Forge. 0-23, 0-22. Forge hit Ashford in a tackle that would have made professional linebackers jealous. 300 pounds of combined mass colliding at full speed. The detonator flew from Ashford's hand, tumbling end over end through the mountain air, LED still blinking its countdown. 0-19, 0-18. The detonator reached the apex of its arc, began falling. Forge's hands shot out, tracking the tumbling device through three-dimensional space, calculating intercept point with the instinctive mathematics of someone who'd spent 12 years as an EOD technician defusing bombs. His fingers closed around it midair, thumb immediately finding the red button, not to press it, but to brace against it, to prevent any accidental activation as he hit the ground and rolled, cradling the device against his chest like it was made of spun glass in prayers. 0-14, 0-13, 0-12. Got it, Forge shouted. Got it! How do I disarm this thing? Ashford lay on his back, zip-tied by Kane in approximately 2.3 seconds, combat gauze being applied to his mangled hand with the efficient brutality of a combat medic who'd done this 1,000 times and had zero sympathy. Code, Kane said, pressing the gauze hard enough to make Ashford gasp. Now. Go to hell, Ashford said through clenched teeth. Kane pressed harder, directly on exposed nerve endings. The code, or I let you bleed out and we all die together. Your choice. Make it fast. 0-8, 0-7, 0-6. Ashford's face went gray, pain and shock warring with whatever remnants of defiance still flickered in his eyes. But survival instinct won. 11, 10, 17, 75, he gasped. November 10th, 1775. Marine Corps founding date. Forge's fingers flew across the device, entering the code with careful precision. His hands were steady, methodical, showing none of the fear that had to be screaming through his nervous system. The LED blinked once, twice, then disarmed in green letters. The collective exhale from 4 operators sounded like a wind gust. Forge set the detonator down carefully. Then he lay back on the rocks and started laughing. Not humor, relief. The kind of laughter that comes when you've stared directly at death and lived to tell about it. 600 yards, he said between laughs. You shot a pistol out of his hand at 600 yards in high wind while he was moving. That's not even possible. Alex was descending from her hide now, Caldwell following close behind. Wasn't possible, she said. Was necessary. That makes it possible. She walked to where Ashford lay zip-tied and bleeding, surrounded by the wreckage of his ambitions. The 8 surviving operators knelt in a line, hands on their heads, guarded by Kane. Volkov was still alive, barely, his shoulder wound bleeding but not arterially anymore. Kane had thrown him a trauma dressing, let him self-apply while handcuffed. Professional courtesy to a dying man who no longer posed a threat. Ashford looked up at Alex, really looked at her for the first time. You, he said, you're the girl from the town meeting, the one Marcus dismissed. I'm the sniper who just saved your life, Alex said, crouching to his level. So you can spend the rest of it in federal prison thinking about the choices that brought you here. She paused. I lost 3 teammates in Helmand Province. 3 good people who died because we walked into an ambush we didn't see coming. And for 8 months, I've been asking myself if I could have done something different. Her voice was quiet, but carried across the silent mountain. You had 50 years to make a different choice, to report what you saw, to choose honor over convenience. And every day you chose wrong. Every single day for 50 years, you woke up and chose to let those cores stay buried, chose to keep the secret, chose to prioritize your career over doing what was right. She stood. That's the difference between us, Senator. I learned from my failure. You became yours. Ashford had nothing to say to that. He simply lay there, broken and silent, waiting for the federal agents who would take him away. The FBI arrived at 2:30 p.m., the familiar thump of helicopter rotors preceding them by 5 minutes. Hostage rescue team in full tactical gear, DOE specialists in hazmat suits, enough firepower and authority to lock down the entire mountain. Special Agent Victoria Ross was first out of the lead helicopter, 50 years old with steel gray hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. She surveyed the scene with professional appreciation. Bodies, prisoners, evidence, one plutonium core secured in proper lead-line containment, and 4 civilians standing in the middle of it all, looking tired, but unharmed. Former military, Ross said, walking up to Alex. Not a question. All of us, Alex confirmed. We secured the scene and waited for proper authorities. That was considerate. Most civilians would have made this into a bloodbath. Ross examined the wounded operators, the zip-tied senator, the recovered core. Who made the long-range shots? Those are sniper-level hits, professional grade. Alex raised her hand slightly. That would be me, ma'am. Ross studied her, reassessing. You're the property owner. Alexandra Harlow, former Marine Scout sniper. Yes, ma'am. And you discovered this operation how exactly? Poachers on my land led to bunkers, which led to Cold War nuclear materials, which led to here. Ross nodded slowly, pulling out a digital recorder. We're going to need comprehensive statements from all of you. This is going to be a federal case that draws attention from Congress, DOD, probably the White House. You understand that? We understand. Good, because right now you're heroes who stopped a nuclear material theft. I'd like to keep it that way. Which means cooperating fully with our investigation. They spent 6 hours giving statements, every detail, every decision, every shot fired and why. The federal agents were thorough, professional, and increasingly impressed. The 600-yard pistol shot became legend before the sun set. Ross called in a ballistics team to verify the trajectory, document the evidence, create a record that would be studied in sniper schools for the next 50 years. 962 yards, the ballistics specialist reported, measuring with laser rangefinder and GPS. Wind at 18 miles per hour from the southwest. Target was a Sig Sauer P226, approximately 4 inches wide, in a moving hand. Shooter was firing from elevated position with angle of decline. He looked at Alex with something approaching awe. That's one of the most difficult shots I've ever documented. Maybe top 5 in military history. Certainly the most precise shot under operational stress I've personally verified. It was the shot that needed to be made, Alex said simply. So I made it. Nathan Weston arrived at 6 p.m., driven up the mountain in an FBI vehicle. Mid-40s, weathered, carrying the weight of 6 years spent tracking his former teammate. He spoke briefly with Ross, then approached Alex's team. You stopped Dmitry Volkov, he said. My responsibility for 6 years. When I learned they were going after Site November materials, I knew I had to act. Your intelligence made this possible, Alex said. That counts for something. Maybe. Weston held out his hand. That 600-yard pistol hit is going to be legend by tomorrow. I had a good teacher, Alex said, glancing at Caldwell. 2 of them, actually, father and son, both taught me that impossible just means you haven't figured out how yet. Before they left the mountain, Forge approached Alex with something wrapped in canvas. Found this in Volkov's vehicle during the FBI sweep. Thought you might want it back. Alex unwrapped the canvas slowly. Her father's M1 Garand, the rifle from Chosin Reservoir, still meticulously maintained despite being stolen. Volkov had kept it clean, oiled, functional, maybe as a trophy, maybe as a reminder of the woman who'd killed his brother. She ran her hand along the stock, feeling the wood grain her father had touched 74 years ago. The rifle that had killed 27 Chinese soldiers in a single night. The rifle that had taught her patience, discipline, precision. He took good care of it, Forge said quietly. He was a soldier, Alex replied. Soldiers respect weapons. She slung the rifle across her back, feeling its familiar weight settle against her spine. Not stolen anymore, not lost. Returned to its rightful place, ready to pass forward to the next generation when the time came. They were released at 10 p.m. with instructions to remain available for follow-up questions. The trials would take years. Congressional hearings, investigations into how 14 tactical nuclear weapons had remained buried and forgotten for half a century, how a sitting senator had conspired to steal them, how close the nation had come to radiological disaster. But tonight, that was someone else's problem. The drive back to Alex's cabin was quiet, exhaustion settling into bones, the adrenaline crash leaving behind tremors and nausea, and profound gratitude for still being alive. At the cabin, they gathered on the porch. Coffee and bourbon, the combination that had sustained warriors since alcohol and caffeine were discovered. "What now?" Kane asked. "Now we wait," Alex said. "Federal investigation, trials, probably congressional hearings. This is going to take years to fully resolve." "And us?" Forge asked. "The team?" Alex looked at the three men who'd answered her call, who'd trusted her leadership, who'd fought beside her against impossible odds. "We did something good today. Stopped a threat most people will never know existed, secured materials that could have killed thousands, brought justice to men who'd hidden crimes for half a century." She raised her coffee mug. "I'd call that a successful mission." They drank to that. To success, to survival, to the bonds forged in combat that lasted longer than any other connection humans could build. Forge and Kane left the next morning with promises to stay in touch, invitations to visit, friendships cemented in fire that would last the rest of their lives. Caldwell stayed an extra day. He and Alex walked her property together, discussing the operation, analyzing decisions, debriefing the way soldiers do when they need to process what they've lived through. "You're exceptional," Caldwell said as they stood overlooking the valley. "Not just skilled, exceptional. The kind of operator that comes along once in a generation." "I learn from the best," Alex replied. "Ethan would be proud of what we did here." "He'd be proud of you," Caldwell corrected. "And so am I. Took me too long to see it, but I'm grateful I finally did." They walked in silence for a while, two warriors separated by 4 decades but united by the same commitment. "What's next for you?" Caldwell asked. "Same thing as you, I imagine, living with what we did, hoping it mattered, maybe being available if someone needs backup again." "I'll remember that," Caldwell said. He left that afternoon, but his truck was barely out of sight when Alex's phone rang. Unknown number. "Miss Harlow, this is Director Margaret Callahan with the Department of Energy." The woman's voice was professional, direct. "We've reviewed your actions regarding the Site November recovery. I'd like to discuss a consulting position. Legacy Weapons Recovery Division. We have sites across the country with similar issues. We need people with your skills and discretion." Alex looked out at her mountain, at the peace she'd sought, at the solitude she'd craved. But she'd learned something important in the last week. She wasn't meant for pure isolation. She was meant for missions that mattered, for standing when standing was needed, for being the person who could handle impossible situations. "I'm interested," she said, "under certain conditions. Name them. I choose my team. I approve the missions. And I stay based here in Montana. I won't relocate." Silence then. "Acceptable. We'll send contract details by end of week." The call ended. Alex sat on her porch and smiled for the first time in 8 months. Not the tight smile of someone pretending to be okay, but the real thing. The smile of someone who'd found purpose again. 2 months later, Copper Ridge held another town meeting. Standard fall business, water rights, boundary disputes. But this time, when Alex entered the hall, the room didn't go quiet with judgment. People nodded, shook her hand, thanked her even though the official story was classified and vague. Sheriff Hayes updated everyone on the federal investigation, carefully worded, but making clear that something significant had happened on that mountain, and Alex had been central to resolving it. Colonel Caldwell stood when the floor opened for comments. "I want to address something I said 8 months ago at this very meeting." The room went quiet. "I made judgments about modern military standards," he continued, "about capabilities, about a particular individual." He looked directly at Alex. "I was completely wrong. Alexandra Harlow is one of the finest warriors I've had the privilege of serving alongside. She's proven that skill, courage, and honor aren't bound by gender or generation. And I'm grateful she chose our valley for her home." The room erupted in genuine applause. Not polite courtesy, but real respect earned through actions that spoke louder than any words. After the meeting, a young woman approached, maybe 19, nervous but determined. "Miss Harlow, I'm Bryn Hayes, Sheriff's daughter. I know who you are, Bryn. I'm thinking about joining the Marines, maybe trying for scout sniper training. But everyone keeps saying women can't really make it through, that the standards are different, that it's too hard." Alex recognized the doubt in Bryn's eyes, the same doubt she'd faced. "The standards aren't different," Alex said. "They're brutal, unforgiving, designed to break everyone who attempts them. But they're not impossible. Not if you want it badly enough. Not if you're willing to work harder than you've ever worked. Not if you can look at failure and say, 'Teach me,' instead of 'defeat me.' Did you ever want to quit? Every day, sometimes every hour, but I'd made a promise to myself, and I'd rather die than break a promise." Bryn absorbed this. "If I try, if I train, will you help me?" Alex smiled. "Every Saturday morning, 0600, my place, bring running shoes and willingness to suffer. I'll be there." Watching Bryn walk away, Alex felt something shift inside her. Legacy. Not through blood or family, but through knowledge passed forward, skills shared, the next generation prepared to carry forward the values that mattered. That night, sitting on her porch under Montana stars, her phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number, but the encryption signature told her it was Callahan. Mission brief attached, Nevada, Project Sagebrush. 9 cores missing, Russian involvement. Interested? Alex opened the attachment, read the details. Another legacy site, more buried materials, another threat that needed stopping. She thought about the peace she'd sought, the isolation she'd craved. But she'd learned who she really was. Not someone running from her past, someone prepared for her future. A warrior who chose her battles. A protector who stood when standing mattered. A teacher who passed knowledge forward. She typed her response. "Send travel details. Need 3 days to arrange things here." The reply was immediate. "Acknowledged. Welcome to the team." Alex set down her phone and looked out at her mountain. The place that had tested her, changed her, revealed her. She wasn't just Alexandra Harlow anymore. Property owner, isolated veteran, woman dismissed and underestimated. She was an operator, sniper, warrior, teacher, and most importantly, someone who'd proven that legends weren't born in any particular generation. They were forged by choices, by standing when others ran, by making impossible shots when everything depended on them. The phone rang again. Caldwell's number. "Saw the news about Nevada," he said without preamble. "Going," Alex confirmed. "Need a spotter?" Alex smiled. "Always, if you're available." "For you, I'll make myself available. This old warrior isn't done yet." "Neither am I, Colonel. Neither am I." They ended the call with plans to coordinate. 2 generations, 2 warriors, 1 commitment to doing what was right, even when it was hard. The stars wheeled overhead, the mountains settled into night, and Alex felt, for the first time since Helmand Province, that she'd found her place in the world. Not in isolation, not in peace, but in purpose, in missions that mattered, in making shots that counted. She was home. And home was wherever warriors gathered to stand against darkness. The legend of Caldwell would endure, taught at Quantico and written in military history. But beside it now stood another legend. Smaller, younger, just as deadly. Alexandra Harlow, the sniper who bought a mountain and defended it against impossible odds. The woman who proved that size didn't matter, gender didn't matter, only skill, courage, and the absolute certainty that when you pulled the trigger, the shot would connect. That certainty was everything, and Alex had it in abundance. She stood, walked inside, began preparing for Nevada, cleaning weapons, reviewing maps, planning for the next mission, the next mountain, the next impossible situation that someone had to handle. Because warriors didn't retire, they just found new battles worth fighting, and Alex had found hers. The mountain held its breath one last time, then released it. The story was told, the mission complete. Justice served 50 years late, but served nonetheless. And somewhere in the darkness, Captain Ethan Caldwell's spirit smiled. His best student had become the teacher. His father had found redemption, and the legacy he'd built through patience and discipline and absolute certainty would continue long after his name was forgotten. That's what warriors do. They pass it forward, generation to generation, skill to skill, until the line stretches from the first person who stood against darkness to the last one who would ever need to. Alexandra Harlow was one link in that chain. Not the first, not the last, but strong, tested, proven, and ready for whatever came next.